And now I'll turn it over to Anna, who's an expert on transportation, and she will run through the next few slides.
Thank you, Larry, and hello, everybody. I will start with a big picture on what is included in the transportation section of the IRA, but then I will spend most of my time talking about the federal tax credit because that is what most directly impacts consumers in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So big picture, there is a lot of funding in the Inflation Reduction Act for transportation-related investments, and I'll go over those in the next slide. In addition, for the first time ever, there is a production tax credit for US battery manufacturing. The value of this credit is dependent on the kilowatt hours worth of output that any particular manufacturer puts out in the United States. But the reason this is so exciting is that right now, the reason the price of electric vehicles is still on average higher than the price of equivalent gas-powered cars is the cost of producing the battery. So this production tax credit can help bring down the cost of producing that battery and therefore hasten the day when we'll reach cost parity between electric vehicles and gas-powered cars. So that is definitely good news. The IRA also extends and changes the tax credit for new EVs, which is what I'll spend the majority of my time on today. It also, for the first time, establishes a new tax credit for used EVs, which is very exciting, as well as establishing a new tax credit for commercial EVs. Commercial vehicles are a huge chunk of the vehicles on our roads that are polluting all the time. So it's really exciting to see the federal tax credit extend to commercial vehicles, both passenger vehicles and medium and heavy duty vehicles. The details of that is that the value of the tax credit is 30% of the sales price or the incremental cost of an electric vehicle over an equivalent gas-powered car, whichever is lesser. And it's capped at $7,500 for vehicles under 14,000 pounds and $14,000 for vehicles over 14,000 pounds. So we are really excited to see this whole spread of new policy, but the commercial EVs piece in particular will complement what we've already had and what is now new and changed on the individual side. But we'll go into all of this in more detail. For transportation funding, the big sort of line items are on this table on the left. So the IRA sets out $20 billion in loans for new clean vehicle manufacturing plants. When I talk about the new clean vehicle credit, the new federal tax credit, a big chunk of that time will be spent on talking about new manufacturing requirements for both the vehicles and the batteries. So that is one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is this funding to help bring clean vehicle manufacturing plants to the United States. In addition to those $20 billion, there's $2 billion in grants for revamping existing auto plants so that they can produce electric vehicles instead of fossil fuel powered ones. And then you might have also have heard there's $3 billion for the electrification of the postal service fleet. $3 billion for cleaning up equipment at ports. Often the equipment at ports is diesel powered and particularly nasty in terms of localized air pollution and harm to human health. So we're really glad to see that targeted. And then there's $1 billion to support the electrification of trucks and buses, which are also some of the worst offenders when it comes to public health emissions. So we're glad to see all of this on the table. Moving right along to the clean vehicle credit. This is the federal tax credit, and there are lots of changes, but I will hopefully go through them in a way that they make sense. So the first thing is that the new federal tax credit goes into effect in 2023, so on January 1st. It's valid now through 2032. So instead of the current system where the federal tax credit phases out when a manufacturer has sold 200,000 units, at this point, or starting on January 1st, the federal tax credit will just be in place from 2023 to 2032, regardless of how many vehicles any particular manufacturer sells. So the lifting of that cap means that some manufacturers that currently don't have a federal tax credit available, like General Motors and Tesla, will be back in the game once these changes take effect. In addition, there are now new income requirements. So up until now, there haven't been any income requirements for the federal tax credit, but starting in 2023, you can only qualify if your income is less than $150,000 if you're an individual filer, or less than $300,000 if you are filing jointly. The clean vehicle credit has also been expanded to now cover fuel cell vehicles. That's one of the reasons why it's now called the clean vehicle credit instead of the federal tax credit for electric cars. And then the final big new thing is that there are lots of new requirements on the vehicle itself. And I will roll right along to the next slide to talk about those. So essentially, there are three new requirements for vehicles. The first is that the final assembly location has to be in North America in order for a vehicle to qualify for the federal tax credit. This provision has actually already kicked in. This kicked in the day that President Biden signed the IRA into law. So the list of vehicles that qualify for the federal tax credit has been shortened for the rest of 2022, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. The second new requirement is that the vehicle has to meet a price cap. So for SUVs, pickup trucks, and vans, the vehicle has to cost less than $80,000 to qualify for the federal tax credit. And for sedans and hatchbacks, it has to cost less than $55,000 to qualify. This price cap kicks in 2023. So for the rest of the year, it's not in place, but it will be in place starting on January 1st. And finally, there's a third bucket of requirements, which are all about the batteries, specifically where the minerals come from and where the battery components are manufactured. This kicks in 2023 as well, but then from 2023 through 2032, those requirements ramp up. So from now until the end of 2022, a vehicle only has to meet the first requirement, the assembly location, but starting in 2023, a vehicle has to meet all three requirements to qualify for the federal tax credit. That battery component that I just mentioned has two parts. So the first is around the minerals specifically. So starting in 2023, 40% of the battery's minerals by value must be mined or processed in North America or a country with a free trade agreement with the United States, or recycled in the US. So all of those ores are there intentionally. They're supposed to make it easier for a manufacturer to meet this requirement, but it is definitely a complicated one. And right now, we don't actually know which vehicles meet this requirement, but by January 1st, hopefully we will. If a vehicle meets this requirement, then it qualifies for a $37.50 federal tax credit. Part two of the battery requirement is around the battery components. So not specifically the minerals, but the components of the battery itself. Here, starting in 2023, the value of the battery components manufactured or assembled in North America must be at least 50% of the battery value. If a vehicle meets this requirement, then it also qualifies for $3,750 in the federal tax credit. So if a vehicle meets only one of these requirements, that's the federal tax credit value. If it meets both, then it qualifies for the full $7,500. This replaces the current way of calculating how much any particular vehicle qualifies for. Up until now, and through the end of 2022, the value has been based on the capacity of the battery. But starting in 2023, this is the new formula that determines how much any particular vehicle qualifies for. As I mentioned, those two battery requirements ramp up over time. The intention here is to give vehicle manufacturers and battery manufacturers enough time to adjust their supply chains and take advantage of those loans and grants to bring manufacturing into the United States. But you can see from this graph that starting in 2027, the critical mineral percentage caps out at 80%, and starting in 2029, the battery component reaches 100%. So this is the schedule that manufacturers now have to hold themselves to if they want their vehicles to qualify for the federal tax credit. There's one more piece to this battery element, and that is a foreign entities of concern clause. So everything I've talked about up until now has been that a minimum percentage of the minerals or the battery components have to be made in the US or North America. But starting in 2024, if any of the battery components come from a foreign entity of concern, then that vehicle no longer qualifies for the federal tax credit. In 2025, if any of the critical minerals in the batteries come from a foreign entity of concern, the vehicle again does not qualify for the federal tax credit. So exactly what that list of foreign entities of concern looks like is not yet clear, but it's pretty widely expected that Russia and China will be on that list, and those are both countries where a huge amount of the current mineral processing happens and manufacturing happens. So starting in 2024 and 2025, you can still purchase vehicles that have either battery components or critical minerals from these foreign entities of concern. They just won't qualify for the federal tax credit. Moving away from the sort of complicated battery requirements, we'll talk about something exciting, which is the fact that used vehicles now qualify for the federal tax credit. One piece of good news is that the battery requirements do not apply for the used car credit. However, there are some requirements that you should know about. So the first is that the value of the credit for used vehicles is $4,000 or 30% of the sales price, whichever is lower. In order to access the clean vehicle credit for a used car, you have to buy the vehicle from a dealership. The vehicle itself must be at least 2 years old and cost less than $25,000. And the credit only applies at the first resale. So if you are buying a vehicle that was previously sold new, you can qualify for this federal tax credit, but then if after 2 years you sell that vehicle to someone else, they won't be able to take advantage of the used vehicle tax credit because it's already been used once for that particular vehicle. And then finally, there's a lower income threshold for people who want to take advantage of this tax credit. And it basically cuts the income cap in half. So joint filers have to make less than $150,000 per year, and individual filers less than $75,000. One other piece that we're really excited about is that starting in 2024, so 1 year later, the tax credit should be available at the point of sale. The language in the bill says that the consumer starting in 2024 can choose to transfer the tax credit to the dealership. Exactly how that's going to work is still TBD. We don't have any details on the process either from the individual point of view or from the dealer point of view. But this is exciting for 2 reasons. One, it makes this federal tax credit accessible to people who otherwise couldn't shell out a couple $1,000s and then wait 9 months to get reimbursed. By making it available at the point of sale, you're opening up this vehicle technology to more people. And secondly, it makes the credit available for people who might not have accessed it under the current system. Because right now, how much you can take advantage of is limited by your personal tax liability. So if you don't owe federal taxes, you can't really take advantage of the federal tax credit. But with this point of sale option moving in 2024, the tax credit should be available to more people independent of their personal tax liability. So those are 2 reasons we're really excited about this, but we will be keeping our eyes and ears out in the next year to get the details on exactly how this will work. That was all a lot of information, so I will do my best to summarize it here in a timeline. So first is that starting August 16th, when President Biden signed the IRA, the assembly location requirement kicked in. Starting at the beginning of 2023, all of the new requirements follow. So that is the income requirement, the vehicle price cap, the battery requirements, those all kick in. The manufacturer cap disappears, which brings back the credit for some of the manufacturers who've phased out so far, and the credit becomes available for used cars. At the beginning of 2024, one of the foreign entity of concern requirements kicks in. This one is about the vehicle, and the point of sale option should become available. From then until 2032, the battery requirements ramp up over time. And at the beginning of 2025, the last piece kicks in, and that is the battery foreign entity of concern requirements. So this is big picture, the changes that are in store for the federal tax credit. This is confusing and has left a lot of people wondering what vehicles are eligible now and will be eligible in the future. And we will summarize this in basically 3 buckets. So there are some vehicles that had been eligible, but are now no longer eligible for the federal tax credit because their final assembly does not take place in North America. So this unfortunately includes some really popular, longer range, more affordable battery electric vehicles that people are really excited about. So in this category, we have the Hyundai Ioniq 5, the Kia EV6, the new Nissan Ariya, the Toyota bZ4X. A lot of the vehicles that we feature in our Cars Coming Soon webinar every quarter are unfortunately in this bucket. The second bucket is that some vehicles are eligible now, but they will become ineligible starting in 2023, either because of the price or because they don't meet the battery requirements. A big caveat is that we don't know which vehicles will and will not meet the battery requirements piece. That's something that the manufacturers have to prove to the federal government between now and January 1st. But we do know some vehicles that won't be eligible because their price is above the price cap. So particular trim or package levels for the Ford F-150 Lightning, the Rivian R1S and the R1T, and the Tesla Model X and Model Y are all in this bucket. They are above the price cap, so starting on January 1st, they will no longer be eligible. Then there's a third and smaller bucket, which is that some vehicles will become newly eligible because of the lifting of the 200,000 unit cap. So starting January 1st, we expect, for example, the Chevy Bolt to become eligible for the federal tax credit again, because it is assembled in North America and it is under the price cap. So as long as it meets the battery requirements, it should be eligible again. If you have a particular vehicle in mind, we have a blog post where we wrote out all of these details, but also included lists of vehicles in each of these 3 buckets. So if you're thinking of a particular car, you can find the one that you're thinking of and get a sense of where it falls. And we'll send out the link to this blog as well, but it's a good written out summary basically of all the things that I've discussed so far today. So there are a couple of unknowns still that will impact that will change the impact of this federal tax credit in the coming years. The first is that we don't know what vehicles, existing and also new models, will meet the 2023 battery requirements. So we don't have a definitive list of models that will be eligible as of January 1st. We really hope to get that in the coming months, but this is one of the big unknowns. The second is that lots of manufacturers purchase or build themselves batteries at different plants all across the globe. And so it's unclear what's going to happen if batteries for the same vehicle are manufactured in multiple locations. If you go to the Federal Department of Energy's website right now and look at the vehicles that are eligible now because they meet the final assembly location requirement, you'll see that the DOE directs you to a VIN decoder, a vehicle identification number decoder, basically a tool where you can type in basically your vehicle's social security number and find out where exactly it was put together. So that lets you find out if any particular vehicle you're looking at was assembled in the United States. But it's going to be interesting to see if a similar tool exists to check where the battery was manufactured. So that is something that will have to be sorted out in the next couple of months. And then finally, we don't know exactly how the point of sale credit will work. We have an extra year to figure that one out because it doesn't kick in until 2024. But that's something that will be important to us to figure out, both for consumers, but also the car dealers in our network. We all need to know how that will work. So we'll keep our eyes out for all of this. I will shortly turn the mic over to my colleague Loie, but I wanted to mention one more thing, which is that the IRA also includes a tax credit for installing charging. So the IRA includes a 10-year extension of a 30% tax credit for installing EV charging. For individuals, that's $1,000 or 30% of the cost, whichever is less. And for commercial installations, it's 30% up to $100,000. This target is really intended to increase EVSE or EV charging installations in rural and low-income communities, because we know that those are places where charging hasn't been built out as fast, which means fewer people can make the switch to an electric car. And one thing we're really excited about is that the tax credit covers bidirectional chargers. So these are chargers that not only take power from the grid and put it into a vehicle's battery, but that are also capable of taking power out of a vehicle's battery and discharging it back onto the grid to help balance supply and demand and shave the peak, cut down energy demand on peak days, which reduces costs for everybody and also emissions disproportionately. So we're really excited about that piece. And with that, I will turn it over to Loie to talk about buildings and efficiency and heating.